same problem you all have. I don't know anything about any of them, except for the Honorable Jan Soifer, who used to be one of my neighbors. So for me, that's easy. And she agreed to come to talk to us about the structure of the court in Texas, because it's very different from any other state. Surprise, surprise. And so for the first hour, we're going to have her talk a little bit about the structure and function of the court at various levels. There is a website, and it's txcourts.gov. It has lots of wonderful information about the courts and how they run and what their responsibilities are. And so I would encourage, that's where the handout that you have in front of you came from. Then we'll have some Q&A with her. And then after that, for the second hour, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how judges might be selected. There is a Texas Commission on Judicial Selection that is meeting during the 2020 calendar year, and they are supposed to come up with a report on recommendations for what to do. It is not a new topic in the state of Texas. We'll talk a little bit about that history later on. And then I will ask you to tell me what the problems are, what some of the solutions could be, and what are the strengths and drawbacks of the various ways that states get to select their judges. See what you can come up with. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Jan Soifer so she can talk to you. The handout that you have, as I said, is available at texascourts.gov, and I will put it on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I see a couple of people in the audience who are who probably could have better given this talk, but as Joanne said, we used to be neighbors, and she knows me, so she asked me, and of course I said yes. But I do think that I need to mention a couple of people, and one is Woody. Woody, Wade,
Former Chief Justice of the Third Court of Appeals.
Yeah. So, and he did that for almost 20 years. So yes, he could easily be the one talking to you. Another is my current colleague, Tim Shulak, who is the local administrative judge, which means he's kind of the judge that all of us civil judges have elected to represent us of our group, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And he will be on your Democratic primary ballot if you will vote in the Democratic primary. And then I also see Selena Avering, who is running for one of the new courts.
Yes.
Let me just say that probably any of the three of them can answer questions. I can't. But let me just start by saying I love this chart, and I'm so glad that Joanne found it, because I think it's really helpful. And I'm so glad you're all here, because sometimes I think that it's a shame that people don't know more about the court system. And the fact that you're all here and wanting to hear more about it is terrific. So the structure, which looks a little bit complicated in this chart, is really not that complicated. And if you start at the bottom, and I'd say start with the municipal courts. So municipal courts are courts that are set up in every municipality or city in Texas that enforce their ordinances. So it includes everything from speeding tickets to if there's an ordinance that criminalizes being homeless or anything like that. That is what those courts do. Those courts, those judges also perform magistrate functions, which means they issue arrest warrants, and people come in before them, and they're there, I think, 24/7. And so in Austin we have 8 full-time municipal court judges, but we also have 15 part-time or substitute judges, and they help fill out the round-the-clock part of the docket. They're all appointed by the city council, so they're not elected. But if you got a speeding ticket and you wanted to contest it, that's where you would go, is to the municipal court. And I think it's still the case that they're in that police building that's at like 7th and I-35. So that's the municipal courts, and that's pretty simple. Those courts are limited in their jurisdiction or their power, what they do. It's primarily city ordinances. Justice courts, which are also called Justice of the Peace courts or JP courts, there's some of these in every county. In Travis County, we're divided into 5 JP court districts. And those districts, like I think right here, we're either in District 2 or District 5. I know I was in District 2, not living far from here for a long time, and then all of a sudden I was in 5. I don't know why, redistricting. But there are 5 justices of the peace in Travis County, and those are elected. So whichever district that you're in, you're electing the justice of the peace for that district. And that is that, and the other courts that we'll talk about are partisan elections in Texas. So we all, if you're a Democrat, you go vote in the Democratic primary. You're voting for potential Democratic nominees of the party. If you're a Republican, you go vote in the Republican primary, and you're voting for potential Republican nominees. And then in the general election in November, of course our primary is coming up in March. In the general election in November, in theory at least, there should be one of each on your ballot. There may also be a Libertarian, there may also be a Green Party candidate. I will tell you that in Travis County, in a lot of areas, and particularly countywide, there tends to only be a Democrat, and that is simply because this county, I think a lot of, after many, many elections, Republicans have figured out that the deck is stacked against them in this county, and that we vote 60 to 65% Democratic in this county. And so there are a lot of elections in which there's no Republican who throws their hat in the ring, in part because it's been tried and failed so many times. In fact, there's a huge power of incumbency, and I'll tell you that even incumbent judges who've been appointed by Republican governors, because if somebody dies or somebody resigns to do something else, the governor gets to appoint. I'll tell you the exception. There are a couple of exceptions. And so it's not unusual, since our governorship went Republican, to have a Republican appointee in these seats. And after a number of times, in most cases, those people don't run for re-election after their initial term, because they've learned you could raise a lot of money, you could do a lot of work, and the likelihood is that you won't win. So we do have some appointments, and the way those appointments come in is when there's a vacancy. And the appointments are made by the governor. Except when we get up to the county level courts. The county level courts, which are also on your ballot, those vacancies are filled by the county commissioner's court. And here's where there's a real anomaly between Texas and everywhere else. We call it a commissioner's court, but it's not a court at all. It is basically the county council. It's equivalent to the city council. And instead of having a mayor at the head of it, what we call the mayor of the county is county judge. Makes no sense. I'm not here to justify it. It's confusing. But the bottom line is the person who is the mayor of Travis County is County Judge Sarah Eckhart. She happens to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a lawyer to be the county judge. In fact, a number of ours haven't been lawyers. But the work that she does is administrative, just being the head of the commissioner's court, and not judicial. She has the right to do some judicial functions, but in urban areas, that's almost unheard of. In more rural counties, that may happen some. But in any event, so we have these county level courts, and the commissioner's court is not one of them. And the county judge, is not actually a judge. But we do have three kinds of county courts. A statutory probate court, which is where if you, somebody dies and there's a contest over their estate, it would be done in probate court. Probate court hears will contests, it hears heirship proceedings, which is what there is if you die without a will. It also hears mental health and guardianship matters. So if somebody is trying to get somebody committed for mental health care against their will, it would go there. Or somebody is trying to get a guardian appointed over somebody because they believe they're incompetent, it goes there. Our probate judge right now is Guy Herman, and he's been there for 40 years? Maybe not quite 40, because he was a JP for a little while before that. I tried my first case in front of him when he was a JP. But he's been there for well over 30 years and is a really good judge. Then there are these two other kinds of courts, constitutional county court and statutory county courts. The constitutional county courts are in non-urban counties. There is at least one, and maybe in every county, and I don't know. And Woody, Tim, Selena, y'all may know. Do we have a constitutional county court in Travis County, or because we have a probate court, we don't have one? Not even sure.
I thought it was the commissioner's court was the constitutional, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, this says they have probate, mental health, and guardianship.
I think that's right. I think that in
Authority.
rural areas, some of the county commissioner, county judge presides over those things.
That may be. So, in any event, most of our county courts are statutory county courts. And this chart says there are 249 of them in 90 counties, which means that in those smaller of the 254 counties, they don't have these. But they handle civil and criminal matters at a lower level than other kinds of courts. And so in Travis County, we have 2 civil statutory county courts and 7 criminal statutory county courts. The civil courts have jurisdiction, I think it just went up to 500,000 in Travis County. It varies by county, but for matters involving amounts in dispute of up to 500,000, you can file them either in the county civil court or in the district civil court. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But it's limited jurisdiction in most counties around the state. I believe it's still 200,000, and some may be even lower than that. It's gone up pretty steadily since I got out of law school. But these are courts that hear smaller civil matters, and civil matters are disputes between individuals and entities generally. It's where there's a car wreck and somebody gets sued. It's where there's a real estate transaction that goes bad and somebody gets sued. It's products liability case where a product hurt somebody and somebody gets sued. So when you talk about suing people, that's civil, as opposed to criminal, which is where the state brings charges. Or in county court, the county brings charges. And so in county court, and actually I guess it's the state as well, in county court, criminal proceedings, they are generally misdemeanors. They're more serious misdemeanors. They're class A and B, which means there could be actual jail time involved, as opposed to the JP courts, which I left out, that the civil actions there are limited to $10,000, what most people call small claims, and criminal misdemeanors punishable by fines only, so not involving jail time. So when you get up to the county level courts, those involve jail time. The JP courts and the municipal courts are not courts where there's a court reporter and a record. That starts in county court. So these lower level courts operate a little bit differently. By the time you get to the county court, the county courts have a court reporter. They're a court of record. Appeals from the JP courts go to the county court. Appeals from the county court go to the courts of appeals, and then to the Texas Supreme Court. So they don't, except in a couple of exceptions, go to the district court. Tim, you may be able to think of the exceptions. It's
Forcible entry and detainer,
so where you're
eviction actions, I think.
yeah, so where you're kicking somebody out, and evictions. Those do go from county to district, but otherwise they go up to the Court of Appeals. So in the county level courts, as I say, 7 of ours are criminal. They're dealing with misdemeanor DWIs. They're dealing with misdemeanor level violence, but with less serious injuries. And they are dealing with some juvenile matters. And they can handle, as I said, the appeals from the JP court. In Travis County, we have a sort of unusual situation, which is our district courts, and that's where Tim and I currently serve, we're overloaded. And the county courts are, in some cases, at least the county civil courts are less busy. And so we have a local rule that basically says that when we need them and they're available, the county court civil judges can step up and handle our cases, which is really, really great. We have a really unusual way we do things in district court, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I'll tell you, when we get up to the district court level, we're talking about the highest level trial court in the state of Texas, in the state system. So we're hearing the most serious, highest monetary level civil cases, and also the felony level criminal cases. So in Travis County, we have 11 civil district judges. We're going to have 12 starting next October. The legislature has already approved the 12th one. Of those, we also have 4 associate judges. Those are judges who are appointed by the district judges to help handle mostly family law, but also tax cases and CPS cases, Child Protective Services cases. So the associate judges are not elected. They're appointed by the district judges, but they help handle a lot of the overflow. And they primarily, as I say, do family law. So we have 4 of those. The other 11 of us, there's one who handles primarily child protective services cases, CPS cases. That's cases where child abuse and neglect is alleged. That court is Darlene Burns' court right now. And then we have one court that's a juvenile court. And in Texas, what would normally be a criminal case against somebody who's a juvenile is a civil case. So the rules of civil procedure apply, and it's kind of an unusual situation, but we don't treat juveniles the same way we treat adult offenders. So we do have one judge who's entirely devoted and is in that Gardner Betts Justice Center y'all may have seen down on South Congress. And there's so that means that, so of those 11, there's 9 of us who handle civil and family cases. And those civil cases include business, commercial, real estate, administrative, consumer, personal injury, any number of things that people sue each other over. Also, we handle in Travis County appeals from administrative agencies, because all the administrative agencies for the state are here. So it's TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, it's the Real Estate Commission, it's any number of commissions. They have hearings examiners that hear disputes, and if they're appealed to us, the civil district judges. So we handle those. So we're sort of unusual around the state in that. And then we also handle the family law cases, that is divorce and child custody disputes, and sometimes the CPS cases, child protective services cases. And unlike any other urban county in Texas, we don't have specialized family law courts and civil courts. All of us pitch in to both. And the way we're doing it right now is about once every 9 months, each of us handle family law cases for 3 months. And I will tell you, having been a civil litigator for 34 years before I became a judge, I had very little experience in family law. I did some pro bono, that is for people who couldn't afford lawyers, but I didn't get involved in these complex property dispute cases and these difficult child custody cases. So it's been a learning experience for me. But I will tell you, at the end of 3 months, I am happy to go back to civil. On the other hand, after a few car wreck cases in a row, I'm happy to go do family law for a while. So it works out really well. I think most of us are really happy with that system, and that's a system that we have devised and we can vote to change, but we never have. We also do something unusual in that in every court, in every district court in the state, when you file a case, it gets randomly assigned to a particular court. In almost every county in the state other than Travis County, that means if you file something and it's assigned to the 345th court, for example, my court, I would hear it. We don't do it that way in Travis County. The way we do it is on a central docket, and we have a court administrator who, he says he operates basically a sliding tile puzzle. If you can imagine one of those things. He makes sure that all of us are busy all of the time, and that no one judge gets to sort of go off and play while the others are working really hard, just because of the luck of the draw, because the other judges got the hard cases that are taking a lot of time. So he distributes the cases, and he has some other people that work for him, distributes the cases equitably, and he does that literally every single day. And it works really, really well. What it means is that in Travis County, unlike I think any other urban county, you can go to a hearing or a trial pretty much as quickly as you want to. And we reach almost every case that's set for hearing. Whereas if you were in Harris County or Dallas County, for example, the odds of your being able to go to trial in less than, I don't know, a year or 2 years aren't very good, and your odds of being able to get heard quickly are not very good. So people from out of town don't understand it. We do have local rules. If they read them, they would understand it, but there are a lot of lawyers who walk into Travis County assuming it operates like all the other counties, and it doesn't. So we have this system, though, that works really well as long as all of us pull our weight. And we are really lucky because we have 11 civil district judges and all of us pull our weight. And so when cases are assigned to us, we're dealing with them as quickly as we can and going on to the next one and staying to do the next one and the one after that so that everything gets heard. So I will tell you that of the cases that we handle, some of them are sort of political. It's a minority, but I can give you some examples that have shown up in my court in just over 3 years since I've been on the court. One is when the agriculture commissioner wanted to poison feral hogs, and somebody sued to stop it because it was going to get in the food chain potentially, and so I had to rule on that case. Kind of political, because sometimes people might tend to just go with the Republican agriculture commissioner if they're a Republican. Recently, Don Zimmerman sued the city council for enacting a provision in their budget where they reserved $150,000 to help for ancillary charges to help women have access to abortion. And he sued to stop that money from being used that way. And that landed in my court. And I was really kind of surprised that he didn't ask me to recuse myself, because I actually represented Whole Women's Health in the lawsuit that went to the U.S. Supreme Court involving abortion rights in Texas. But then I realized that he looked at the courts that we have, and with one of the judges in our courts, and figured with only one exception, who was a gubernatorial appointee, he was going to land in any other Democrat's court who probably wasn't going to buy his argument, which had a lot to do with how hazardous to personal rights and everything abortion was. As I say, that those are the rare instances where there's something political. I will tell you that also guns in City Hall case landed in my court one day, and people were suing to require the city of Austin to let guns into the city council building. I had to say to the lawyers in that case, so before I became a judge, I was chair of the Travis County Democratic Party, and in that capacity, I went and testified against all of the gun legislation. And so if you want to choose a different judge, you want to have me recuse myself, I will. And the lawyer for the Attorney General, who was fighting city council, said, "Yeah, I think we'll see you next time, Judge." And now they got another Democrat, and that other Democrat still had to apply the law and the facts, and I'm not sure that her decision would have been any different from my decision. But the bottom line is, from time to time, there are these political cases. There are election contests too. Those are rare. But those are the cases that sometimes people hold up when they say either there should be partisan elections or there shouldn't be partisan elections. And for that part of the discussion, I want to mention that they're rare, but they happen on occasion. So in the felony, the criminal district courts, we have 9 felony criminal courts that are criminal district courts. And I think in October they're getting one more also. And so there will be 10. And they have one, what we call associate judge, they call a magistrate, who in that case I think handles some special docket that's a docket that you hear some about cases that go that get deferred into a different system so that there's treatment instead of punishment. It's I think that kind of court. In any event, I mentioned that we have, with one exception, all Democrats on the civil district courts in Travis County. We have one court that is held by a Republican appointee of the governor's. And he is not running for re-election. He was filling a partial term. And actually, it's the second partial term he's filled. The governor's appointed him twice. And the governor will get to appoint somebody to that new court that starts in October until there's an election held for that. And I will tell you, his name is Dustin Howe. And most of us Democrats couldn't be happier with the choice the governor made. He is a really nice guy and by all accounts a really good judge. Now, would he handle these political cases the same way we do? I don't know. But we do have this one, and he isn't running for re-election because, as I say, that's been tried a number of times, and it's not easy to run. It costs a lot of money. You got to raise a lot of money, and it hasn't been successful in this county in many, many years. So that's the district courts. Now, all of our cases can be appealed to the courts of appeals. And there are 14 courts of appeals in Texas. Austin is part of the 3rd Court of Appeals, which has 24 counties, which I'm sure Woody could tell us.
You used to be able to recite them.
Yeah, Judge Jones could probably. I know that there are a couple who made it a point of being able to tell you all 24 of them. And those courts of appeals have between 3 and 13 judges on them, depending on where they are. Ours, and the one that covers Travis County, the 3rd Court of Appeals, has 6 judges, which until the last election was all Republican from the time of Woody's last election, because it used to be that Travis County, even when the state was mostly red, Travis County was so much bigger than the other counties, and we had so many more voters, that court stayed in Democratic hands for a long time. But in, I guess, George W. Bush's first term, is that when you were swept?
Yes.
The Democrats were all swept out, and we had 6 Republicans, which has been the case until 2018, when 4 Democrats beat 4 Republicans. So now we have 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And again, just like we have a few political type decisions that we have to make, those political type decisions can be appealed to that court. And so, for example, you may remember there was a case about whether a check was cash for the purpose of some statute about collecting cash on the, was it on the floor of the legislature or something? And the judge in Travis County said, of course, that's the same thing. And the Third Court of Appeals, then ruled by Republicans, said no. A check is different from cash. So sometimes it matters what party people are in these cases. It just does. And it matters sometimes because what party the litigants are in and whether they're trying to make a political point. And that was in the case involving Tom DeLay, yeah. So you can imagine the Republicans kind of had his back. So, the Court of Appeals, the courts of appeals in Texas make decisions in panels of 3. So we have 2 panels of 3 in Austin. And as I say, some counties only have 3. But those courts of appeals handle both civil and criminal cases. So if you can imagine, all the cases are funneled up from civil and criminal courts up to the courts of appeals. So they are incredibly busy, and they have to handle all of the appeals that come to them. I will tell you that they have a way, they don't have a central docket the way we do, but they have a way of trying to equalize what comes to them, and that is by transferring cases to less busy courts of appeal. And I just got a notice this morning that one of the cases that came from my court got transferred to the first court, which kind of surprises me that the Houston courts aren't as busy as the one that handles Travis County. But so that's they do some of that to sort of equalize workload.
So do the panels, is it 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, or is it?
So the Chief Justice gets to decide who's on the panels. Isn't that right?
No, it's just a rotating thing. It switches every 6 months.
There you go. So right now, I think there's maybe sometimes 3 Democrats and.
No, actually, in almost every case now, there's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican.
The Chief Justice knows. You need to ask Justice Jones this question. So in any event, you can ask well, you can ask any court to reconsider. You can ask the Court of Appeals to reconsider, and you can also ask them to make an en banc decision. That is, have all of the ones in that court decide. So in the case of the Third Court of Appeals, that would be you're asking for a decision by all 6 of them because you think that somehow the 3 that you got aren't representative. It doesn't get granted very often. I don't know if you have any statistics on that, but it doesn't get granted very often. But you can do that, or you can appeal to the Texas Supreme Court. If it's a civil case. If it's a criminal case, it gets appealed to the Court of Criminal Appeals. Texas is unusual in that it has basically 2 different Supreme Courts, a civil one and a criminal one. So although all cases get funneled up to the courts of appeals, criminal and civil, they go back out to either a criminal or a civil Supreme Court. So the Texas Supreme Court, and I believe this is true for the Court of Criminal Appeals as well, is a court that has discretionary review. That is, they can decide whether or not to hear the case. They don't have to hear every case. And in fact, they're supposed to hear the cases that are either of significance to the jurisprudence of the state of Texas, or where there are differing decisions out of some of the courts of appeals. And so in 2018, I looked this up this morning, there were 1,451 cases that the Texas Supreme Court decided in 2018. So they don't, sometimes they just say, we don't see any reversible error here. We're going to let the Court of Appeals decision stand. Sometimes they reverse it and make a decision, and that stands, or sometimes they reverse and remand it, and it has to go back to the lower courts. So the Texas Supreme Court is the final appellate court in Texas. But as y'all know, there isn't just a state court system, there's also a federal court system. The federal court system just has 3 layers. The federal district court, which is the equivalent of the court that I have, the federal circuit court or appellate court, and then the U.S. Supreme Court. People can get to the U.S. Supreme Court 2 different ways. One is they can appeal a decision of the Texas Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court. They have discretionary review too, and they take even fewer cases from all over the country. So you can do that. It's not very likely that your case is going to get reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, those 3 court levels are all appointed by the president. So all the federal district judges, all the federal appellate judges, and there are 12 circuits, I think, something like that.
I've lost track.
Huh?
I've lost track.
Yeah, and they've created some new ones as it got too heavy. But anyway, and then there's the U.S. Supreme Court. The thing you hear the most about is the U.S. Supreme Court because it's concentrating on the cases that are of the most importance to the jurisprudence of the United States. And I mentioned that whole women's health case. In my 34 years of practicing law, that is the only case that I've had that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, was accepted by the Supreme Court, and went to our oral argument, and the Supreme Court made a decision in. So it's very, very unusual.
What they decide?
They decided that Texas's law did not give adequate consideration to the rights of women, and they decided that the Texas laws were unconstitutional. They've just accepted an identical law from the state of Louisiana. The Supreme Court has shifted, and there are now 2 conservatives that were appointed by the Republican president, and so the thought is that they may reverse. They may make a completely different decision and overrule the decision that the Supreme Court just made a few years ago in the Texas case. So that is how the courts work, and I'm happy to answer other questions.
At the bottom there, I don't quite understand the difference between the justice court and the municipal court. They both say criminal misdemeanor punishable by fine only. How do they decide which court you would end up in if it's a criminal misdemeanor?
I believe that, and either of the judges can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the municipal courts, it's only crimes that are by city ordinance. And so the justice courts are part of the county court system, and it's criminal cases that are set up in state statute, but are low-level criminal cases, whereas the municipal court, it's just municipal ordinances. Yes?
I was curious what you mentioned about the juvenile cases, that they would be treated like a civil case, but would a juvenile defendant would have to be convicted beyond reasonable doubt, or do they have that lower standard of preponderance of evidence? I mean, what are their rights in that regard?
I assume it's preponderance of the evidence, is that right? No. I haven't ever done that.
I don't think so. I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt. The way it's similar to a civil case is in the procedure.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't want the juveniles to lose their rights for a trial.
Yes.
You want to define juvenile?
So it's criminal actions against people who are younger than 17, 16 and some,
17.
17? I know
There is a question.
There have been laws
legislative whether it should be increased to 18.
or reduced to 16. But, then they can be confined only until that birthday, the 17th or 18th birthday, and then they can have additional punishment meted out depending on the crime. They go to juvenile lockup instead of felony kinds of jails and prisons. Mhm. Yes?
If a hospital sues a patient for non-payment of a bill, what court are we talking about?
So it depends on the size of the bill. Assuming it's under 500,000, they could sue either in county civil court or in district court. If it's, so district court, there's concurrent jurisdiction. District court can handle any amount. County court only goes up to 500,000.
Okay.
So civil district court. And let me just say one thing about the federal trial courts. So the federal trial courts handle two kinds of cases. Either they're cases under a federal statute, or they're cases involving citizens of other states. There's diversity of citizenship. And so there are some instances where if a hospital from somewhere else wanted to sue you and you now lived in Texas, then it may be, and there's a threshold jurisdiction amount, 100,000? Can't remember. They could sue you in federal court. But the federal courts are, the federal district courts are sort of equivalent to our civil district courts, but they also have criminal jurisdiction. So they kind of do both what we do on the civil side and the criminal side of the district. All right, other questions? Yeah.
Besides party affiliation, what should voters look for when they're electing a judge? What characteristics?
I will tell you that the most important characteristics, in my opinion, is experience. So, you know, you don't want to elect somebody who's never stepped foot in that kind of court. You don't want to elect somebody who has been off doing something else, not trying lawsuits. My personal opinion, and this is all a matter of opinion, is what you're looking for is somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows how that court works, knows the rules, knows the law, and has the right judicial demeanor. So you don't want to hire a hothead to do a job that requires that you be sort of level-headed, and you want to hire somebody who's spent a lot of time in that kind of a practice so that they know what they're getting into. That's my personal opinion. Mm-hmm.
Are there any judicial evaluation of performances?
We'll get into that later.
Well, I'll tell you that
In fact, we will.
most of the bar associations do a judicial evaluation poll. The Travis County, the Austin Bar Association does one of all the Travis County judges, including judges on the Court of Appeals and judges at my level and county court judges. I don't know if they do JPs.
I think they do.
And so they send it out to members. There's like 5,000 members of the Austin Bar, and they ask people how much experience they have in front of each court, and they ask people not to fill it out if they have no experience. And I will tell you that these two gentlemen right here have always scored at the top of the bar polls. I think Woody had a long record of being rated better than every other judge in our county. And Tim has taken over his record. So that's a lawyer poll. There's also a judicial preference poll that is done of people running for a court who haven't actually been in the court yet, and they ask lawyers who they think is most qualified. So there is that. There isn't one where they ask people who have been litigants in the court their opinions. Yes.
Why would anybody want to be a judge? Especially when it's such a political thing in a state like this.
Well, I'll tell tell you from my personal experience. It's, you have to want to do public service. You have to feel like you'd be good at it. I've seen a lot of judges over my 34 years of practicing, and some have been really, really good, and some have been really, really bad. And I wanted to contribute to Travis County continuing to have really, really good judges. And so for me, for a lot of people, for a lot of lawyers, although it pays well, it doesn't pay as well if you're in a really lucrative practice. But it's really, it's intellectually challenging. It's interesting every day. And it can be really, really gratifying. So, yeah.
What would make a bad judge? You were saying that they're either really good or really bad. But
From my experience, a bad judge is one who doesn't listen, who thinks they make up their mind without listening, because they either think they know better or maybe they don't understand and they just make a decision. Who treat people disrespectfully who appear in front of them, who yell at them, it happens, who don't show up or keep people waiting for sometimes hours, who don't take the job seriously. It happens. It happens. And it's not easy to be a good judge. I mean, for me, a good judge is one who, first of all, has the experience to know what they're doing and to feel like they understand what the job includes, which is applying the facts to the law. So having a good grasp of the law and being able to understand the facts and ask the questions you need to ask in order to get there. And who is respectful to everybody who appears in front of them. And there are some days that no matter how stupid I think somebody's argument is, I'm not going to tell them that it's a stupid argument. That's not my job. My job is to let them have their day in court. And if I think their argument is a good argument, then to rule against them. But I think it's really important that people do get their day in court and that they feel heard. And so having really good ability to listen is really important too. Yeah.
Are there any minimum requirements, like being a member of the bar, to run for?
So there are different requirements at different levels. I think at the civil district level, it only requires 5 years of practice and 30 years of age.
Over 25 years old, I believe.
Wow. Minimal.
Yeah, it's minimal. I think by the time you get to the Supreme Court, it requires 10 and 35 years of age. So, yeah, a little bit.
Then you live there and then.
I have a question that we hear a lot about with immigration courts and immigration judges. Where do they fit into the judicial system?
They don't. So the immigration courts are part of the Department of Justice. They're appointed by the Attorney General, I think, and they report to the Attorney General so the Attorney General can tell them what to do and how to do it. And they aren't accountable for election or, as far as I know, impeachment as people who are appointed by the president would be. It's like a 10-year term too, I think.
With respect to the comments that you made about judges, I was wondering if you might comment on your perspective on the judicial appointments made by President Trump to the federal bench. There's been a number, it's kind of off the scope of what we're talking about with the state judges, but there's been some concerns that he's appointed judges, or tried to appoint judges that were not qualified.
So I will tell you one thing, which is just like there's this bar pole by the Austin Bar. In federal appointments, almost every president has paid attention to the American Bar Association's evaluation of people who are considered for appointment. And this president has decided he doesn't care what the American Bar Association's thoughts are. So he's basically short-circuited through that. So it used to be that there was kind of a minimum standard decided by a nonpartisan, bipartisan group of lawyers in the American Bar Association. That isn't happening today.
To what extent though? I mean,
Didn't someone had never even tried a case in court and they were appointed lifetime?
There are some of those, from what I hear. I don't have personal knowledge about that, but from what I hear, yes.
Yeah, I just assume try to avoid partisan issues if I can, please.
Yeah, you gave part of an answer to this earlier, but how is the remuneration level of judges determined? And how does it relate to the lawyers who are appearing before them?
So it's by statute, and the interesting thing in Texas is that the retirement income of state judges is also tied to their current income, and so is the income of members of the legislature, who, as you know, are famously underpaid in Texas, you know, what, $8,000 a year or something crazy like that. But they get retirement based on what judges make. So that makes them really hesitant at times to give judges raises because it looks like they're doing it to give themselves more money. And so for the first time in something like 15 years, the legislature gave us a raise, but the way they gave us a raise wasn't by increasing the base salary, which is what their income is based on, but they gave us a raise by an increase each 4 years. So when I hit 4 years, I'll get a 10% increase. But no judge's income had been increased in like 12 or 16 years. So there were a lot of judges working for the same amount of money as they had. Like Tim.
So let's take one more question in the back and then we'll move on to the next part.
Okay, during the sentencing phase, is there, in regard to fines and court other fees that are astronomical, especially to someone that's poor, is there any way to do a sliding scale according to income, or how would that work?
So I'm not a criminal judge, and I never practiced criminal law. My understanding is there are ways that Texas courts deal with people who are indigent or unable to pay, but I'm not familiar with it, and so I can't really speak to it. Sorry.
Will you help me thank this unusual system that we have? I mean, it really is quite unusual. There aren't other states that do things quite this way. So the next part of what we are going to do today is similar to some of the questions you've asked, and I hope that you're going to be able to answer some of those questions amongst the group, because the Texas Commission on Judicial Selection that I mentioned is reviewing how we select judges currently. And so Common Ground for Texans was curious about how you think about the judges, the systems of how we select judges. One of the reasons we're interested is that we are part of a network of organizations called the Texas Fair Courts Network that is listening to the commission as the commission begins its conversations. They've met once and they will meet monthly from now on. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that they're considering. Interestingly enough, there was a presentation that referred to the number of times that this has come up in both the legislature and in other venues. And it starts in 1946, when the first, the Texas Judicial Council proposed a constitutional amendment for merit selection of judges. 1946. It goes from 46 to 53 to 71 to 86 to 97, 87, 95, 96, 97, 1999, 2001, 2017, and now 2019. So selection of judges is looking at selection of judges in the state is not an unusual event. It is interesting that if you're at all interested in following this politically, the Brennan Center for Justice has an area that looks at the court system and how we select judges throughout the country. And Texas is one of 6 states that elect judges by partisan elections. And so 6 is not terribly many. So what I thought that we would start with is the question of whether we have a problem, and if we do have a problem, what is the problem? And in fact, the chair of the commission asked all of the commissioners, there are 15 commissioners, asked all of the commissioners, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And so I'll ask you that same question. What do you think the problem is?
Well, if they're partisan, then people might vote for the party and not for a qualified judge.
Okay. Qualifications versus anybody have any idea why this is coming up again this year? You want to tell them?
Because of the blue wave.
Because of the blue wave that took place in Harrison County. So waves take place. If you hear Wallace Jefferson speak on the subject, he will tell you that he was elected to the Texas Supreme Court because he has a great name, Jefferson, and he had an R after his name. Those are the 2 things that he will say. And between Chief Justice Hecht and Wallace Jefferson and Tom Phillips, who have both been working in this area for years and years and years and years and years, their concern is this concern. There's hardly part of that concern, but this wave that takes place, and depending upon who's at the top of the ticket. So that's a second one that I'm going to bring up is the wave. And qualified judges lose their seats. What's another problem?
Checks and balances at the state level.
I'm sorry, where did that come from?
Checks and balances at the state level between the judicial, legislators and the executive branches.
Okay, so let's,
Checks and balances.
checks and balances. Yes.
Because they're
Since we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, a judiciary branch, yeah.
I think the electorate is not provided with the criteria necessary to make an informed decision about the qualities needed for honest and fair decision making. Judges don't make policy decisions. They decide specific cases with specific facts and a specific skill sets required. So Experience might be one, as Judge Soifer said, but temperament's important. And ability to guard against inherent bias is another. We don't have a way to get at that.
Okay.
The flip side of the wave, as our speaker was mentioning, somebody that won't run because they think, what's the point? And yet they could be very good. So, Republicans don't run in Travis County. So qualified people not stepping up.
Interestingly enough, the governor is having difficulty filling positions by appointment because lawyers don't want to give up their practice for a short period of time because they have no guarantee that they will be reelected. So they have a great deal of difficulty. Yeah.
Lack of diversity as far as, it can be one party and so the whole.
Person on the bench. There's one glaring one that you haven't mentioned.
Potential pressure on the decision-making to keep it balanced and nonpartisan since they're represented by a party. The judges themselves.
Pressure to make certain decisions.
Influence their choice.
Especially if it is close to an election. Right? Happens often. There's one big one.
I was just gonna say the question, why not too many females are wanting to.
That's diversity on the bench.
Yeah.
Campaign contributions.
There you go, money. Right? That's the top for me. So I'll put my bias in there. Campaigning. Interestingly enough, at the first commission meeting, one of the commissioners said that the good part about campaigning is that you get to go and meet your constituents, get to know the people that you're serving. But he doesn't like this part of it, right? So what would be the method by which he could continue to speak to the people who may be voting for him? Anyway, so you've come along with quite a few of these things that are particularly important. The one, and I think many of these also I was going to do an exercise on values, what values you might want to see in judges, but I think that you've got that pretty much covered here as well. So what I thought would be an interesting exercise would be to look at, to switch pens here, different kinds of words, to look at the different types of selection methods that are used around the country. Elections is one, on the other side of the board is appointments. And we can take a look at partisan elections, nonpartisan elections, the strengths and drawbacks of each one of them based on what the problems are, right? What's good about each one of them and what's not so good. I will also mention to you, interestingly enough, and I do have a question for Jan too, and that is, interestingly enough, there are 4 states where the Secretary of State requires candidates for judge to fill out a questionnaire, and it is available through the Secretary of State
Texas
on their website. And it's an it looks like an interview. So there are open-ended questions, there are closed-ended questions. But you get an idea of who these people might be. That doesn't need a statutory change. So it will be interesting to see whether there is any additional information that comes out of these conversations because of low information voters. How do we get the information that we need? So my question of Jan is, if there is a review, is that review available to the public?
So the League of Women Voters does a questionnaire.
Right, but it's usually 3 questions and they get certain number of words and then it gets cut off.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
you're talking
enough.
about the bar poll?
Yes,
So that, there usually is a press release that goes out from the Austin Bar Association, so it lands in the Austin American Statesman. So there is that. You know, it does come down to some extent to money, because the key is for the candidates to be able to get the information to the voters. And interesting thing about, somebody mentioned about not very many women running. I can tell you that when I was a first-year lawyer in 1982, there was one woman district judge in Travis County. And now, of the 10 of us who are elected, there are 8. One of them's retiring, and 2 women are running for that place. And the other is Tim's bench, and there is a woman who's running against Tim. And who will probably argue that there should be another woman. And in Travis County, the fact that somebody's a woman for low information voters tends to make them more likely to vote for women. So, in this case, he can speak for himself, but he'll say he needs to get out the information that I mentioned in the bar poll, that he's rated the highest rated in the county, and about the difference in their qualifications. If he doesn't raise enough money to do that, he could lose.
so we've got partisan elections, we have nonpartisan elections. Quite a few states have nonpartisan elections. You know that for the first time in 2020, you will no longer be able to vote straight ticket by pressing one button. So you have to go down the whole list. It will tell you whether a candidate in any office is a Republican or a Democrat, but you have to go down the whole list. Please do remember that this is going to be a long list, but these are important elections. And so I would suggest that you all bear with the ballot, right, and go through the whole thing.
A question about like the ballot format itself. Say, for example, if you go to vote in the primary, there's no indication about who the incumbent is, for example. Say if like a judge has like 2 challengers, they just have their names there. It doesn't say who's the judge and who, any occupations. Like in California, they have, for every candidate, they have an occupation with the ballots. Like who's an incumbent and who's not, and what they're like. They're a prosecutor.
I don't know
or
whether
defense
they
attorney or something.
do. I have not looked. Do they have incumbent?
Well, I know you can download your ballot right now.
Well, that's true.
You can study up on it.
Yeah.
In Texas, it does not show who the
It
incumbent
doesn't
is.
show, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So clarification,
Yes.
nonpartisan election, that's different than an appointment?
Yes.
So it's
Nonpartisan election is there is no party affiliation designated on the ballot. So it's like city council.
Okay.
So city council is at large. These would be basically at-large posts.
Question.
So, yes.
Within the general topic of nonpartisan, do you want to have a subset about retention elections?
It is on the other side of the world. I do.
So, 15 states have commission-based appointments.
Yes, quite a few.
That's not the
We'll
same.
get to that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
So first is elections, traditional elections rather than retention elections. And so the first then would be, based on what we have over here, what would be a strength for that particular system?
I would have some idea of
There's some information.
what their biases were.
Some information for a low information voter. Right? That typically is one of the reasons that people bring up. There is yet another one that you might not be able to draw you out on, and that is that people feel that they have the right to vote, and they want to vote for their judges. It's just the right to vote. They want to vote for all elections. So let me put that one down too, because it comes up quite a lot. drawback? We got one of them right up at the top, right? That's one. Yes.
Tribalism.
Tribalism.
Potential bias. Potential bias.
Potential bias. Waves. Right? Remove qualified. Judges may lose. Because of that wave. Based on the top of the ticket, in other words. So if you're a low information voter and you don't know anything else, and in fact, there are quite a few legislators who are not certain what's going to happen when we no longer can vote straight ticket.
Like a big drop off as you go down.
Big
the
drop
ballot.
off.
Yeah.
Will there be a drop off or won't there be a drop off? If there is a drop off, who is voting in those down ballot races? That's unknown at this point. Jan?
I would just add that in the strengths, when you live in the blue dot in the red state, then the voters get to choose instead of the governor of the opposite party. So if you're in a county that is different, governed by a different party, then you're giving those citizens the right to choose their own judges as opposed to the governor of the other party.
That's right to vote, really.
I'm sorry?
That's the same as right to vote. That is the same thing as the right
As
to
the
vote.
right to vote. And have your voice be heard. Yes, sir.
It's difficult to imagine a person without any bias.
Yes.
Vote for a Democrat or Republican, you already know what their bias is.
Interestingly enough, there have been a lot of surveys that show that people aren't interested in being informed. They are not interested in seeking out the information. So I've had this conversation with my husband that says, okay, if the Secretary of State then provided all of this information, he'd say, well, nobody would go look at it. And I'd say, I'd go look at it, so I'm somebody. But that most people will not go that extra mile.
So that's a strength in terms of a judge running, because they don't have to spend all the money they may not have to support the party, but they also don't have to convince everybody who they are. So if they're a member of a party, they get the benefit of those choices. When you're running, you can make it more possible. Well, you're on the right side of the way.
Party back.
Instead of under.
Yes.
I'd like to also say too, that if the information is not out there, that is suppression. So a lot of people don't know where to look for it.
That's true.
Comes in there.
Absolutely.
You mentioned a longer interview style. Where would that appear that people could find it and read it?
My understanding is that in these 4 states, it appears in the Secretary of State's website. And you go directly to their website and it's listed. And those states, if you're curious, are Alaska, California, Oregon, and Washington. Surprise, surprise. So, for nonpartisan elections, what do you think some of the strengths might be?
People wouldn't have to lie about their party affiliation. I saw an ad in the Chronicle saying, this person is running as a Democrat for judge, but is not a real Democrat. So you would have to lie about his affiliation if everybody was on the same ballot.
Yeah, sure.
So I mean, everybody would just register as a Democrat if they want to run for judge, obviously, in Travis County.
or switching parties,
Right.
for that matter, right? Switch parties.
Get elected, that's
Hmm.
Get elected. Republican switching parties in Travis County to get elected.
You could really concentrate on the person's qualifications as opposed to, you know, which bucket they fall into, because definition of what it means to be of a particular party seems to shift over 10 or 15 years. It could be very different from what it used to be. So
Qualifications versus.
for the position versus some label, Republican or Democrat, that may change significantly what it means to be that.
We lived in a place where we had these nonpartisan elections for judges. And if you're working full-time, you don't have time to go through all these long lists of judges and check their qualifications. So what happens is, the first thing you do is check whether they're Democrat or Republican.
So it goes back to this question of some information versus maybe little information. Not no information, but little information. Unless we can find some way of getting that information available, right? And I guess drawbacks, one more.
Well, I think that is a drawback. If I don't know about a candidate, I don't vote in that race.
Right.
I don't think that's a strength.
Low voting.
Low information. Yep. And the swings will take place based on.
They still have to raise money, don't they?
Yes, they do. They still have to raise money. Run. And which also means that the decisions closer to elections may change based on party.
And people ignoring the down ballot races.
Yes. So there's a drop off. Yeah.
That's either partisan or nonpartisan.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Closer to. And that's true for both. So, yeah.
One way, it could be that judgeships would be determined by a smaller group of very, people who are very fanatical about that person. So a smaller, even smaller group
Could be voting.
elected.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a drop off question. So, appointments. There are some states where governors or the legislature appoints. There are some states that have merit selection. You may have heard of the Missouri Plan. The Missouri Plan is a merit selection plan that has been adopted by many states. And we can talk about the strengths and drawbacks, but in merit selection, the devil's in the details. Right? So that we have to talk about what those devils are. So if you have a handout, on the back of the handout, it shows, TexasCourts.gov has a huge chart that's school print. So I took some of the data from it and made it into something that might be interesting to see, because Jan Soifer mentioned something that you may not be aware of. If you take a look at the Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, and you look to see how many of those Texas Supreme Court judges, the first time that they came on the Supreme Court, whether they were appointed or elected. And I want you to tell me how many of them were originally appointed.
78%.
On the appellate level, they were almost all elected, interestingly.
Appointed?
Interestingly enough, and so it's quite different. Because what often happens at the Supreme Court level is that they retire early so that the governor can appoint, and you tend to vote for the incumbent. So there's the incumbent. Like, wins over Howard. So, governor and legislature, what are the strengths of governor appointments?
Speed of filling the appointment. You can fill the appointment right away. You don't have to wait.
Right? Speed.
Not determined by money.
Not determined by one. Sure. Not willing to put that one in there.
Well, there's contributors to the governor.
Correct. Yeah. We can talk about the people who are on the commission, if you like, which we will do when we talk about
If
commissions.
you like the governor, you'd be happy.
Right.
Yeah.
With the points.
In line with, for better or worse, let's say, your values.
Is it something like a payback?
Excuse me?
Something like a payback?
Payback. Payback.
Well,
That's
not
a
a
drawback. Yeah, that may be a drawback.
Because it's appointed by the governor.
So the drawback, somebody mentioned, right, one of them is money, right, in terms of a contribution.
Or if not the judge contributing themselves, the person that wanted to be a judge special interest, wanting particular kinds of judges who contribute and promote certain types of judges.
Promoting. Jan.
I was gonna say that I have a friend in Connecticut who was in line for a gubernatorial appointment at the same time as I started running, which was about 4 years ago. And he was strung along the whole time until that governor finally was not reelected. And there's a new governor and he's being strung along again, so the time thing doesn't necessarily work. And it's all about, like, who can put the most pressure on the governor to pick their person. At least that's from this one experience I have.
Sure, so, well, let me not do it this way, let me do it this way. Let's see.
Confirmation
Delayed, yeah, confirmation. Delay. It's not exactly confirmation, because they're not going to be confirmed.
Well, doesn't the
But
legislature,
appointment delay.
wouldn't the legislature have to confirm the governor's appointment sometimes?
Not
in some
necessarily.
states?
Nope, not necessarily. Some states do it that way, some states don't. And there's yet another question. Well,
It doesn't seem to be a very democratic process.
yep. Because you're not voting. Okay. So, in the interest of time, I'll
You can move over and put a not in line with your value.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so how about merit selection? Sure. The question is, what does it mean? So in many states, in fact, if you are really curious, if you look up the Missouri Plan or look up Sandra Day O'Connor, she is the author of the Missouri Plan. And there is a report that was produced by the University of Denver on the Missouri Plan. And interestingly enough, one of the people who was advisory to that is Wallace Jefferson. So you can tell where he stands. So in the Missouri Plan, there is a nomination commission. And the nomination commission evaluate, lawyers apply for a judge position. And the commission then evaluates applicants. And in many cases, will rank the top 3 candidates that they then send to the governor, and the governor has to accept one of the 3. So there is an evaluation process that is done by a commission. There is also, so that's a nominating commission. So there's a nominating commission.
How do you get on the commission?
You apply. That's
Part of the question.
nomination. And there's also an evaluation commission in some states. Because one of the things that didn't come up over here was a question of accountability. So if you're not voting, how is a judge accountable? So that's where the evaluation commission comes in. So let me give you an example. The Commission for Judicial Selection, how was the law written? The law was written where the governor has 4 appointees. The lieutenant governor had 4 appointees that had to be from the Senate. The Speaker of the House had 4 appointees, which had to be representatives. The State Bar had 1 appointee. Nathan Hecht, Chief Justice Hecht, had 1 appointee, and the head of the appellate court had an appointee. So there were 15 members. There was supposed to be geographic distribution. There was supposed to be party distribution. There was to be ethnic distribution. And to some extent, they did a reasonable job, except for party affiliation, for obvious reasons. So, but I'm not so concerned about that personally when you realize that this conversation has taken place from 1947 to today, right? This is an ongoing conversation. The chair is David Beck. He had an op-ed in the Houston Chronicle, I believe it was, that strongly supported merit selection. And then Dan Patrick came out 2 days later and said, "You mean we're not going to be able to elect our judges?" So there we've got the problem, right? So merit selection has gotten some strength, but we come to the problem of retention elections. And retention elections either have the same problem that all the other elections have, or they have a problem where it's assumed that they will all get reappointed or reelected, right? It's an up or down vote. There is not a campaign between 2 individuals, right? Or 3 individuals on a ballot. It is an up or down, yes or no. You want to retain them or you want to get rid of them?
And that applies to both the governor, legislature appointed,
Or just merit selection. with a retention election.
So the ones that are appointed by the governor are in for life? Or is
They will have terms, they'll expire, then the governor will appoint someone else. So they're complete governor appointees.
Well, in California, they do where the governor appoints, and then there's a retention election.
Correct. There are lots of hybrids of this kind of stuff as well. So, but in terms of the strengths of merit selection, let's talk about what some of those strengths might be. Better qualified people.
Maybe apolitical people that aren't associated with the political system.
I have a question about this.
You can make them diverse.
Less money.
And less, no money, less money. Perhaps, yeah, typically.
Joanne, about the qualification, in other words, if 4 and 4 are appointed by the governor and the lieutenant, that's top heavy considering the bar and the whole thing. But are they selecting from a pool of candidates?
They are selected from a pool of candidates.
Whether they're by the governor or the other?
No, they're selected by the nomination commission.
Correct.
In some states, the candidates, it's usually between 3 and 5, are sent to the governor's office to select one of those 5. In some states, the governor can say, no, I don't like any of those 5. Most people are not supportive of that kind of system because it bastardizes the system from the beginning.
If the nominating commission is political, wouldn't all of their merit selection be depending on what their affiliation is?
So the nomination commissions, I can't really address exactly how they are selected. But what I can tell you is think about when we first districted city council districts, we had a citizens commission to do it. And that citizens commission, people applied and they were evaluated and they were distributed by region and sex and ethnicity and so forth. And they drew the maps. So these nomination commissions are quite similar. There are a certain number of lawyers on the commission. There are certain party affiliations on the commission. There are gender affiliations on the, not affiliations, but gender differences, regional differences. So, and the Brennan Center has a wonderful list of attributes for nomination commissions. How many should there be? Who should be the people who are nominating them to the commission? So it's a very involved process, but there are some well-documented, successful nominating commissions in that they were not politically motivated. But you're absolutely right, the devil's in the details, in who sits on the nominating commission and who gets to appoint them, and what kinds of questions are asked in that interview process. But it's been around for quite a long time.
So are those really the only 2 options? Why, is there any reason why it couldn't be where you have a commission that says, these are the qualifications that the judge has to meet? Then it goes to people to actually vote.
Okay, that's the follow-up question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so, no, seriously. When you look at what has happened since 1947 and today, I'm going to make a prediction. I could be all completely wrong. I'm going to make the prediction that we continue to elect judges, where we are electing judges today. Let's make that prediction. If that's the case, what else can we do to make the system a better system? Does that mean that there's nothing we can do? Or are there things that are left? In which case, what are they? Like qualifications for judging. Like recusal requirements. Right? There are all kinds of non-statutory, if you will, things that can be done to requiring that the Secretary of State interview not interview personally, but require them, all judges, to complete an interview form that then gets proposed to the population, that is available to all of the people who are considering the vote. So there are some things that can be done, even if all of these things fail, because there are positives for all of them, and there are drawbacks for all of them. And so what one has to weigh then is, are there drawbacks that I'm willing to live with for a system that might be better? Because there's no perfect system. There is no perfect system.
So how do we do it? So how do we do it?
So I think I guess we could put drawbacks down here so that we complete it. And the retention election is the same problem. Either it's not an election at all, because they're always confirmed, right? Which is mostly. And then they're, in fact, talking about that right now. Is this really an election? And do we put money into it? The drawbacks for me are the details. It looks like a great system. I would encourage you to take a look at, and one of the things that the Texas Fair Courts Network is doing is looking at the values that we would like to see in the judicial system. We're looking at the question of, are all levels of the court selected in the same way? Maybe it should just be appellate courts. Maybe the appellate court should be in merit selection, and maybe district and below should be elected. They don't all have to be the same. And the argument there has been that district judges in rural communities know their judges, and district judges in urban communities tend not to unless you have a next door neighbor, right? So, and the hope, of course, is that they don't say, well, if the district has a population of X or greater, we'll let them do it one way, and if the district has a population of X or lower, we'll let them do it another way. That's not acceptable, right? It really needs to be all levels of the court. So that's sort of the kinds of things that we're thinking about, and you've been really helpful. There is one thing that I will read to you just as a conclusion, if I can find my glasses that aren't working. A piece of paper. So, this is from the Brennan Center. A judge's job is to apply the law fairly and protect our rights, even when doing so is unpopular or angers the wealthy and powerful. But the reality of competing in costly, highly polarized elections is at odds with this rule. If a judge rules against a major donor, will that donor still fund her next campaign? If she angers a powerful political interest, will she face an avalanche of attack ads? These electoral pressures create a morass of conflicts of interest that threaten the appearance and reality of fair decision-making. They're also a roadblock for aspiring judges who cannot tap million-dollar networks. Choosing a selection system involves trade-offs. For example, requiring sitting judges to stand for re-election or retention can help advance the value of accountability, but requiring judges to hear cases in the looming shadow of an upcoming election can also threaten the value of judicial independence. So we've got lots of qualities that we want, and these trade-offs are difficult trade-offs. So I mean, I hope that the commission is, the people on the commission are interesting folks. Wallace Jefferson and Tom Phillips happen to be on the commission, which is interesting to me. So
are you going to have a link on your website that is going to be, people are going to be able to find this information?
yes, so I will have a link on our website, and we will have the video on the website, as we always do. And I encourage you to go to texascourts.gov, because they have a wealth of information there, right? If you're at all interested. So along with the handout that I gave you today, they actually have a multi-page document that lists all of the responsibilities of each of the levels in the court. It's quite lengthy, but it's very informative. I learned a lot. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.